Poor Omega Girl paid just 5 coins for a pup with a sack on its head, what he became after 3 months. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, we would like to ask for one small favor. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our newest videos. It only takes a moment, it is completely free, and it helps us continue creating dramatic, emotional, and inspiring stories just like this one. Your support truly means everything to us. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. We always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and meeting viewers from around the globe. Now let us begin today's story. The smallest act of kindness can awaken a destiny that even kings have forgotten. Elena Whitmore had exactly 5 worn copper coins resting in the palm of her hand, and they were everything she owned in the world. The morning breeze drifted through the crowded marketplace, carrying the scent of fresh bread, damp wood, and wildflowers from the nearby forest, but none of those comforting smells could erase the whispers that followed her wherever she walked. Poor Omega, someone muttered as she passed. She cannot even afford proper boots. Another merchant laughed quietly before turning away. Elena lowered her eyes, not because she believed their words, but because arguing had never changed anyone's heart. Her faded ivory dress had been mended so many times that the stitches had become part of its design, yet she wore it neatly with quiet dignity. Every coin she had saved had come from gathering herbs, helping elderly villagers repair their gardens, and spending long hours collecting medicinal plants deep inside the forest. She had planned to buy flour and enough vegetables to last another week, but fate had prepared something entirely different. At the far end of the marketplace stood an old wooden wagon unlike the others. There were no colorful banners, no cheerful customers, and no eager sellers calling for attention. Instead, several rough-looking traders stood silently beside weathered cages covered with worn blankets. Most people avoided the wagon as though something inside carried terrible luck. Curiosity gently pulled Elena closer. She noticed frightened birds, abandoned rabbits, and exhausted puppies waiting quietly for someone who would never come. Then she saw the smallest one. A tiny silver-gray pup sat alone in the corner of a wooden crate. Unlike every other animal, its head was completely covered by a rough burlap sack tied carefully around its neck with a faded blue ribbon. The little creature remained perfectly still, breathing softly, never attempting to remove the covering. It looked neither frightened nor angry. Instead, it carried a strange sadness that Elena could not explain. "Why is its head covered?" she asked softly. The old trader looked surprised that anyone had even noticed the tiny animal. "Because no one wants to see what is underneath," he answered with a tired shrug. "People say it is cursed. Buyers complain. Covering its face makes it easier to sell." Elena frowned gently. The pup slowly lifted its head toward the sound of her voice. Although she could not see its eyes, she somehow felt it was looking directly at her. A quiet breeze stirred through the market, and for a brief moment the faded blue ribbon around the sack fluttered gently, revealing an old silver symbol stitched into the fabric. It resembled a crescent moon surrounded by tiny stars. Before Elena could study it more closely, the cloth settled once again. "How much?" she asked. The trader glanced at the lonely pup before answering without emotion. 5 coins. Elena looked down at the small stack of copper resting in her hand. Buying the animal meant she would return home with no food, no flour, and no certainty about tomorrow. Around her, several shoppers chuckled as though they already knew she was foolish enough to care. One woman whispered that only a poor Omega would waste her last coins on something nobody else wanted. Elena smiled quietly instead of replying. She stepped forward, placed every one of her 5 coins into the old trader's weathered hand, and gently lifted the tiny pup into her arms. It was surprisingly warm despite the cool autumn air. The little creature rested its head carefully against her shoulder without making a sound, and for the first time that morning, Elena felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. As she walked away from the marketplace carrying the mysterious pup toward the lonely cottage hidden beyond the forest, none of the people watching realized they had just witnessed the beginning of a story that would one day change an entire kingdom. The little cottage had never felt less empty. Elena carefully carried the silver-gray pup through the narrow forest path until the village disappeared behind the tall pines. Her home rested beside a clear stream where wildflowers grew freely between smooth stones, untouched by the noise and judgment that filled the marketplace. The cottage was small enough that a single fire could warm every corner during the colder months, but it had always been filled with quiet peace. She gently placed the tiny pup on a folded wool blanket beside the fireplace before kneeling to untie her worn boots. The little animal remained perfectly still, its burlap sack never shifting, its breathing calm and steady as though it already trusted the unfamiliar place. Elena smiled softly. "You must be hungry," she whispered. She searched through her wooden cabinet and found only a small loaf of yesterday's bread, a handful of dried herbs, and enough goat's milk to fill one small bowl. Without hesitation, she poured nearly all of the milk into the bowl and placed it carefully in front of the pup. It hesitated for only a moment before drinking quietly with perfect manners, never spilling a single drop. Elena laughed gently to herself. "You are much more polite than most people I know." The pup slowly lifted its covered head toward the sound of her voice, and although its face remained hidden beneath the rough fabric, she somehow felt it understood every word. As evening settled across the forest, golden sunlight filtered through the cottage windows, painting warm patterns across the wooden floor. Elena prepared a simple vegetable soup using the last of her carrots and onions. She tore the remaining bread into 2 equal pieces, placing one beside the pup while keeping the other for herself. She never once regretted spending her final coins. Watching the little creature eat peacefully filled her with a quiet happiness that no amount of money had ever given her. After supper, she noticed something unusual. The pup walked slowly toward the old bookshelf standing beside the fireplace. It stopped before a dusty leather journal that had belonged to Elena's late grandmother. The animal gently rested one tiny paw against the shelf without making a sound. Curious, Elena removed the journal and opened it. Most of the pages contained notes about herbs, healing plants, and stories passed down through generations, but one faded illustration caught her attention. It showed an ancient moon surrounded by 12 stars, almost identical to the silver symbol she had briefly seen stitched beneath the pup's burlap sack. Before she could study it further, a cool breeze drifted through the open window, flipping several pages before stopping on its own. Strange, she thought, although she smiled at the coincidence and carefully closed the journal. Outside, the forest became unusually quiet. Even the crickets seemed to pause as the first full moon of autumn rose above the treetops. Pale silver light spread gently across the clearing, touching the roof of the cottage before spilling through the windows like liquid light. Tiny glowing particles began drifting through the air, so faint that Elena barely noticed them. They circled silently around the sleeping pup before disappearing into the moonlight. Far beyond the forest, hidden among forgotten mountains, an enormous stone gateway covered with ancient carvings trembled almost imperceptibly. Moss slipped from weathered symbols that had remained untouched for centuries. Deep beneath the earth, crystal pillars reflected a faint silver glow for the first time in generations. No human eyes witnessed the change, yet something ancient had quietly awakened. Back inside the cottage, Elena covered the sleeping pup with a warm blanket before adding another piece of wood to the fire. "Whatever happened to you?" she whispered kindly. "You do not have to face it alone anymore." The tiny creature curled closer to the warmth without making a sound, and somewhere beneath the worn burlap sack, a pair of unseen eyes closed peacefully, as though they had finally found the home they had been searching for far longer than anyone could possibly imagine. The days settled into a gentle rhythm that neither Elena nor the little pup ever questioned. Every morning she gathered a woven basket and disappeared into the forest to collect herbs, wild berries, and medicinal flowers, while the silver-gray pup patiently waited on the porch until she returned. It never wandered far from the cottage, never barked without reason, and never behaved like the playful puppies she had seen growing up. Instead, it seemed to observe everything with remarkable patience, almost as though it carried memories far older than its tiny body should have possessed. Elena often smiled at the strange thought before reminding herself that loneliness sometimes encouraged an active imagination. As autumn slowly painted the forest with shades of amber and crimson, the villagers began noticing quiet changes around the lonely cottage. Flowers that normally bloomed only in spring suddenly blossomed beside the narrow path leading to Elena's door. Fruit trees that had not produced a healthy harvest in years became heavy with bright red apples. Even injured birds appeared to recover more quickly after resting near the stream beside her home. People whispered that fortune had finally smiled upon the poor Omega, while others insisted something mysterious had settled inside the forest. Elena paid little attention to either opinion. She simply continued helping anyone who needed medicine or healing herbs, asking for almost nothing in return. One cool afternoon, an elderly traveler stopped outside her cottage after twisting his ankle on the rocky trail. Elena welcomed him inside without hesitation, cleaned the injury, wrapped it carefully with fresh linen, and offered him warm soup. Throughout the visit, the little pup remained quietly beside the fireplace, watching every movement with unusual focus. Before leaving, the traveler noticed the burlap sack covering the animal's head. "Has it always worn that?" he asked with quiet curiosity. Elena nodded. "It has never. Tried to remove it, and I have never forced it to. Everyone deserves to keep their secrets until they are ready to share them." The old traveler looked thoughtfully at the pup before smiling. Kindness without curiosity is a rare gift. After thanking her, he continued his journey, carrying with him a story that would soon travel farther than either of them expected. Days later, in a distant mountain city surrounded by towering white stone walls, a gathering of scholars examined ancient maps spread across a massive oak table. One gray-haired historian carefully compared several weathered manuscripts before speaking. "The old records all describe the same sign," he said. "When the forgotten moon air begins to awaken, the forests bloom out of season, forgotten symbols shine again, and creatures of the wild gather without fear." Another scholar slowly pointed toward a faded illustration depicting a crescent moon surrounded by 12 stars. "Reports have arrived from the western forests," she whispered. "Every sign has begun appearing there." At the same moment, deep within a royal archive hidden beneath an ancient castle, several silver crystals embedded in the walls emitted a soft glow for the first time in centuries. Guardians who had devoted their lives to protecting forgotten history exchanged silent glances. No alarms sounded. No proclamations were made. Yet each of them understood that something impossible had quietly begun. Back at the cottage, Elena sat outside beneath the evening sky while carefully repairing a tear in her favorite blanket. The little pup rested beside her with its covered head leaning gently against her shoulder. Fireflies drifted above the nearby stream as the first stars appeared overhead. Without warning, the silver symbol hidden beneath the faded blue ribbon briefly shimmered beneath the burlap sack before fading once again. Elena never noticed. She simply reached down and stroked the pup's soft fur with a gentle smile. Somewhere beyond the trees, unseen by human eyes, several magnificent white wolves emerged from the shadows. They stood silently along the edge of the forest, lowering their heads toward the small cottage before, disappearing once more into the moonlit wilderness, as though honoring someone they had finally found after generations of waiting. Nearly 3 months passed, and every sunrise seemed to weave another invisible thread between Elena and the mysterious little pup. She never questioned why it preferred to sleep beneath the window where moonlight reached the wooden floor each night, and she never attempted to untie the faded blue ribbon holding the burlap sack in place. Trust, she believed, was never something that could be demanded. It had to be given freely. The tiny companion followed her everywhere through the forest, carrying small bundles of herbs in a woven pouch she had fashioned especially for it. Whenever she knelt to gather healing plants, the pup somehow always led her to the healthiest patches, as though the forest itself whispered directions only it could hear. Villagers slowly noticed that Elena's remedies worked better than ever before. Children recovered from seasonal fevers more quickly, tired farmers found renewed strength after drinking her herbal tea, and neglected gardens unexpectedly flourished after she shared simple planting advice. Many thanked her sincerely, while others quietly wondered whether fortune alone could explain so many blessings gathering around one lonely Omega. Elena accepted neither praise nor suspicion. She simply continued living one peaceful day at a time. As the 90th day approached, the moon appeared larger each evening, glowing with an unusual silver brilliance that bathed the forest in soft light long before darkness settled completely. Strange dreams began visiting Elena. She saw endless stone halls filled with moonlight, towering white pillars wrapped in flowering vines, and a magnificent throne standing beneath a ceiling that looked like the night sky itself. Each dream ended the same way. A calm voice whispered, "Compassion remembers what history forgets." She always awoke before seeing who had spoken. On the final evening of the third month, a gentle autumn breeze carried thousands of silver leaves through the trees, even though no wind had stirred only moments earlier. Elena finished placing fresh bread on the table before noticing the little pup sitting perfectly still in the center of the cottage. It was facing the open window where the full moon had just risen above the forest. The air became wonderfully quiet. Even the stream outside seemed to soften its song. Tiny points of silver light drifted into the room like floating stars, circling slowly around the little animal without touching the floor. Elena watched in silent amazement, unsure whether she was dreaming. The faded blue ribbon loosened by itself. It slipped gently onto the wooden floor without anyone touching it. A heartbeat later, the rough burlap sack slowly unfolded and floated away as though carried by invisible hands. Instead of revealing anything frightening, an extraordinary glow blossomed from within, warm and gentle like the first light of dawn. Elena instinctively shielded her eyes, yet she felt no fear. The light surrounded the tiny pup completely, growing brighter with every passing second until its small form could no longer be seen. The cottage filled with shimmering silver patterns that danced across the walls, and the ancient moon symbol from her grandmother's journal appeared glowing above the fireplace before fading into the air. Outside, the magnificent white wolves emerged once more from the forest, gathering silently beneath the full moon. They lowered themselves respectfully toward the cottage as though welcoming the return of someone they had honored long before written history began. Elena stood frozen, her heart racing with wonder rather than alarm. She realized that the little companion she had fed, protected, and loved for 3 simple months had never been an ordinary pup. Whatever destiny had quietly awakened inside her humble home was older than kingdoms, older than legends, and it had chosen this ordinary cottage because one poor Omega had offered kindness without asking for anything in return. The silver light slowly faded until the cottage became quiet once again, but nothing inside it was the same. Where the tiny silver-gray pup had been standing only moments before, a tall young man now stood beneath the moonlight streaming through the open window. His long black hair shimmered with faint silver reflections, and calm gray eyes rested gently on Elena with unmistakable gratitude. He wore a simple dark cloak woven from the same mysterious light that had surrounded the little pup only seconds earlier, and around his neck hung a crescent-shaped pendant identical to the ancient symbol she had discovered inside her grandmother's journal. Elena remained perfectly still, not because she was frightened, but because her heart was trying to understand what her eyes had just witnessed. The young man slowly lowered himself onto one knee, placing one hand over his heart with quiet respect. "My name is Kalen Ravenshade," he said, his voice warm and steady. "For 3 months, you gave shelter to someone the world had abandoned. You offered kindness without asking who I was or what I could become. Because of you, the oldest promise beneath the moon has finally been fulfilled." Elena searched his face, remembering every peaceful evening beside the fireplace, every shared meal, every walk through the forest with the little companion who had never left her side. "You were the pup," she whispered almost to herself. Kalen smiled with gentle warmth. "Every moment." He explained that centuries earlier, the final heir to the ancient moon throne had been hidden beneath a powerful enchantment when those who desired the throne sought to erase the royal bloodline from history. The guardians who created the spell understood that strength alone could never protect the future. They bound the last heir into the harmless form of a young wolf, concealing even his face until someone chose to love him without expecting anything in return. Only 90 days of genuine compassion could awaken the forgotten heir and restore the ancient covenant that protected the kingdom. Elena listened quietly, struggling to imagine that the lonely little animal she had carried home from the marketplace had once belonged to a forgotten age of kings and legends. "Then why did you remember me?" she asked softly. Kalen looked toward the glowing moon outside the window before answering. Because kindness reaches places that memory cannot. While the enchantment hid my name, my power, and my past, it could never silence my heart. Every gentle word you spoke, every meal you shared, every time you respected the secret beneath the burlap sack became part of the key that unlocked my true self. Outside, the white wolves remained gathered beneath the moonlit trees, their golden eyes reflecting quiet loyalty. As if responding to an unseen invitation, they slowly approached the edge of the clearing before bowing their heads toward Kaelin. Elena watched in amazement as dozens of luminous moonbirds circled above the cottage, filling the night sky with shimmering silver feathers that disappeared like stardust before touching the ground. Far beyond the forest, ancient towers that had slept beneath vines and stone for generations awakened one by one, their crystal beacons glowing softly against the darkness. Hidden doors sealed by forgotten magic slowly opened, while guardians who had waited their entire lives quietly smiled as though recognizing a long-awaited sunrise. Kaelin turned back toward Elena with sincere gratitude shining in his eyes. "The kingdom believes it has lost its rightful king forever," he said gently. "They do not know that an ordinary Omega with only 5 coins restored a hope that thousands of years of power could never recover." Elena looked around her humble cottage, still filled with the warmth of the evening fire, and realized that the greatest miracle had never been the transformation itself. It had been discovering that the smallest act of compassion could awaken a destiny capable of changing the future of an entire world. Before the first light of dawn reached the treetops, Kaelin quietly stepped outside the cottage and looked toward the distant mountains rising beyond the forest. The white wolves that had gathered during the night were still waiting in complete silence, their silver eyes reflecting respect rather than command. None of them approached until Kaelin gave a gentle nod. Only then did the oldest among them step forward and lower its head. Elena watched from the doorway, wrapping her wool shawl around her shoulders as the cool morning air drifted across the clearing. Everything felt familiar, yet entirely transformed. The small cottage remained the same. The stream still flowed peacefully beside the wildflowers, and birds continued greeting the sunrise with cheerful songs. But the invisible world surrounding her had awakened. Kaelin turned toward her with the same calm smile she remembered from the little pup that had faithfully followed her through the forest every day. "There is something I must show you," he said softly. "It has waited a very long time for someone like you." Elena hesitated only long enough to close the cottage door before walking beside him into the forest. The white wolves surrounded them at a respectful distance, moving almost silently between the ancient trees. As they traveled deeper into the wilderness, the familiar paths slowly disappeared, replaced by towering oaks whose trunks were covered with glowing silver vines. The air felt lighter with every step, carrying the gentle fragrance of blooming jasmine even though autumn had already settled across the valley. After nearly an hour, the forest suddenly opened into a hidden clearing unlike anything Elena had ever imagined. At its center stood an enormous stone gateway, carved from pale white marble that shimmered beneath the morning sunlight. Ancient symbols covered every pillar, each one identical to the crescent moon surrounded by 12 stars that she had seen inside her grandmother's journal. Crystal fountains flowed without visible springs, their waters sparkling with soft silver light before disappearing beneath the earth. Hundreds of white flowers bloomed across the meadow despite the changing season, filling the air with quiet beauty. Elena stood speechless. "I have lived here my entire life," she whispered, "and I never knew this place existed." Kaelin nodded gently. "That is because no one could find it until the Covenant awakened again. The sanctuary reveals itself only after compassion restores what ambition once destroyed." As they stepped through the great stone gateway, dozens of men and women dressed in elegant silver robes emerged from the surrounding gardens. None wore crowns or displayed symbols of authority beyond the glowing crescent emblems embroidered upon their clothing. Instead of bowing to Kaelin first, every guardian respectfully turned toward Elena. An elderly woman with kind blue eyes stepped forward carrying an ancient crystal staff that reflected the morning light like polished ice. She smiled warmly before speaking. "Welcome home, child of compassion. For generations we protected these halls, believing the forgotten moon heir would someday return. Yet our oldest records revealed another truth. The heir could never awaken alone. The true key would be the ordinary soul willing to offer kindness without expecting recognition. Elena looked around the magnificent sanctuary, struggling to understand why everyone regarded her with such respect. She had never sought greatness. She had only offered warmth to a lonely creature that needed a home. The elderly guardian gently placed an ancient book into Elena's hands. Its weathered cover carried the same silver moon symbol that had quietly followed her journey from the very beginning. Power built these walls, the guardian said with a peaceful smile. But love opened their gates again. That is why history will remember your name beside the king's, because kingdoms may be restored by strength, but they are only worthy of enduring when they are first rebuilt through compassion. News of the forgotten moon heir spread quietly across the ancient kingdom, carried not by loud celebrations, but by travelers, scholars, and guardians who understood that history had finally begun turning another page. Within days, respected leaders from every region made the journey to the hidden sanctuary. Some arrived filled with hope, while others came carrying years of doubt and old traditions that had survived long after wisdom had faded. Elena stood beside one of the crystal fountains, still wearing the same simple ivory dress she had mended countless times before. Nothing about her appearance suggested greatness, yet every guardian who passed greeted her with genuine respect. She found the attention uncomfortable. "They should be honoring you," she whispered to Kalen. "You are the rightful king." Kalen smiled gently as they walked through the marble gardens. A crown may inherit authority, but trust must always be earned. They are honoring the heart that restored both. Before Elena could answer, the great silver doors of the council hall slowly opened. Representatives from ancient Alpha families, respected scholars, village elders, and sanctuary guardians entered beneath towering arches decorated with glowing moonstones. The atmosphere remained calm, yet everyone understood the importance of what would be decided inside those walls. An elderly nobleman stepped forward first, his silver robes marked with the crest of one of the oldest Alpha houses. He respectfully bowed to Kalen before speaking. "Your Majesty, the kingdom has waited generations for your return. We are prepared to restore the ancient moon throne immediately." Several council members nodded in agreement, but another leader quietly added, "There is also the matter of the Omega who awakened the covenant. Tradition has never recorded such a role. We must determine where she belongs within the restored order." Elena lowered her eyes, suddenly feeling as though she had become an unexpected question inside someone else's history. Before anyone else could speak, Kalen rose from his seat with calm confidence. His voice remained gentle, yet every word carried quiet certainty. "There is nothing to determine. Elena does not belong to the throne. She does not belong to this council. She does not belong to tradition. She belongs only to herself, and every choice about her future will always remain her own." Silence filled the magnificent hall. Several elders exchanged thoughtful glances, while others slowly reflected upon words they had never expected to hear from a returning king. The elderly guardian who had welcomed Elena the day before stepped forward carrying the ancient crystal staff. "Our oldest records prepared us for this moment," she said. "For centuries, many believed the covenant protected a bloodline. They misunderstood its true purpose. The covenant has always protected freedom, because love that is demanded is not love at all." She opened the ancient book and revealed a weathered page written in shimmering silver ink. As the words touched the moonlight flowing through the crystal ceiling, the letters began glowing softly. Every person inside the chamber watched in amazement as forgotten lines appeared beneath the original text, as though the book itself had been waiting for this exact moment. The newly revealed passage declared that the future of the kingdom would never again be decided by birth alone, but by compassion, wisdom, and freely chosen loyalty. Elena looked toward Kalen, and for the first time she realized that the greatest change was not the return of a forgotten king. It was the beginning of a kingdom where no Omega, no Alpha, and no ordinary villager would ever again have their worth measured by status instead of character. As the silver light slowly illuminated every corner of the council hall, even those who had arrived clinging to old customs quietly understood that a new chapter had already begun, and it had been written not by power, but by kindness. The morning after the council gathered, the sanctuary welcomed people from every corner of the kingdom. Farmers walked beside scholars. Alpha families stood beside Omega families. And travelers who had only heard whispers of the forgotten moon air now witnessed history unfolding with their own eyes. No banners celebrating victory decorated the marble halls. Instead, fresh white flowers lined the ancient pathways, reminding every visitor that renewal often arrived quietly rather than with great displays. Elena wandered through the peaceful gardens, still finding it difficult to believe that only 3 months earlier she had worried about buying enough bread for another week. She paused beside one of the crystal pools where the clear water reflected both the blue sky above and the ancient moon symbol carved into the surrounding stone. "Everything has changed," she whispered. Kalen joined her with the same calm warmth that had comforted her since the days when he had followed her through the forest as a silent little pup. "Not everything," he replied with a gentle smile. "You still choose kindness before anything else. That is why the kingdom has hope." Before Elena could answer, the elderly guardian approached carrying the ancient book once again. "The final page has awakened," she said softly. "It has not revealed itself for hundreds of years." Together, they entered a circular chamber beneath the sanctuary where sunlight and moonlight met through a great crystal dome above. The ancient book rested upon a white stone pedestal. As Elena placed her hand upon its weathered cover, silver letters slowly appeared across the final page without anyone touching the ink. The words declared that the future guardian of the Moon Covenant would never be appointed by birth, wealth, or title. Instead, the role would always belong to the first soul who freely offered compassion when there was nothing to gain. Every guardian standing nearby lowered their heads with quiet respect. Elena immediately stepped back. "I never wanted a title," she said honestly. "I only wanted to help someone who needed kindness." The elderly guardian smiled peacefully. "That is precisely why the Covenant recognizes you. Those who seek honor rarely understand its true purpose." Kalen looked toward Elena before speaking with complete sincerity. "The kingdom will never ask you to become someone you are not. Whatever path you choose, it will always be your decision." Elena remained silent for a long moment as she looked around the magnificent chamber, then remembered her little cottage beside the stream, the simple meals they had shared, and the quiet happiness she had found long before she knew who Kalen truly was. Finally, she smiled. "Then I choose to remain exactly who I have always been. I will continue helping people, healing those who need care, and reminding everyone that no life is too small to matter." The crystal dome above them suddenly filled with gentle silver light that spread across the sanctuary and flowed into the forests beyond. Throughout the kingdom, forgotten moonstones hidden inside ancient villages glowed once more, while gardens, rivers, and forests shimmered with renewed life. The guardians understood immediately. The Covenant had accepted not a queen, not a ruler, but a promise. It had confirmed that the greatest strength would always belong to those who chose compassion freely. As Kalen stood beside Elena beneath the radiant crystal ceiling, he realized that the throne had finally found something even more valuable than a rightful king. It had found the heart capable of ensuring that every generation after them would remember that true greatness begins with ordinary kindness freely given. Seasons passed, but the story of the lonely cottage beside the forest stream never faded into legend because its greatest miracle had never been about magic. It had been about a single decision made by a young Omega who refused to let kindness depend upon appearances. The ancient Moon Kingdom slowly transformed into a place where every village, every family, and every traveler understood that true honor began not with power, but with character. Under King Kalen Ravenshade's guidance, the forgotten sanctuary reopened its gates to everyone who wished to learn, regardless of whether they were Alpha, Omega, or born into an ordinary family with no ancient name. The old customs that had measured worth by status alone quietly gave way to new traditions built upon wisdom, compassion, and service. Elena never asked for a palace, a title, or riches beyond what she needed. She chose to restore her small cottage beside the stream, welcoming anyone who needed healing herbs, warm meals, or simply a place where they would not be judged. Yet the humble home that had once sheltered only one mysterious little pup gradually became known throughout the kingdom as the House of the First Kindness. Travelers crossed mountains simply to thank the woman whose gentle heart had restored hope to an entire generation. Children grew up hearing the story of the 5 copper coins, learning that the smallest gift offered with genuine love could become the beginning of something far greater than anyone imagined. Whenever Kalen completed his duties at the Moon Citadel, he often returned to the little cottage without royal ceremonies or grand announcements. He preferred sitting beside Elena beneath the old oak tree overlooking the stream, sharing quiet conversations while watching fireflies dance above the water at sunset. Those peaceful evenings reminded him why the ancient covenant had chosen compassion over ambition. A kingdom could be defended by strength, but it could only flourish when its people remembered how to care for one another. Years later, the elderly guardian placed the ancient book inside a crystal chamber where future generations could study its pages. One final sentence slowly appeared beneath every other inscription, although no one ever saw new ink touch the parchment. It simply revealed itself beneath the moonlight as though the covenant wished to leave one last reminder. The words read, "The greatest rulers are remembered not because they possessed power, but because they inspired kindness in others." Visitors who read the passage often searched for the names of famous kings and queens, yet they always paused longest before the simple account of an ordinary Omega who had spent her final 5 coins on a lonely little pup wearing a burlap sack. That story remained the heart of the kingdom because everyone recognized themselves somewhere within it. Some remembered times when they had felt overlooked. Others remembered moments when a stranger had shown unexpected kindness. Many left believing they could become that person for someone else. On clear autumn nights, villagers sometimes reported seeing magnificent white wolves standing quietly along the edge of the forest, their silver eyes reflecting the moon before they disappeared into the trees without leaving a single footprint behind. The elders simply smiled whenever they heard those stories, believing the ancient guardians still watched over the promise that had been restored. And so the Forgotten Moon Kingdom entered a new age where no child was taught that greatness belonged only to the powerful, no traveler was valued according to wealth alone, and no lonely soul was dismissed because of outward appearances. All because one ordinary young woman looked beyond a burlap sack, chose compassion over judgment, and proved forever that love freely given possesses a strength capable of changing not only one life, but the future of an entire world.